is the priciest steak you can buy. But if your local restaurant is offering Kobe beef, there's a good chance that that is not what they're selling.
Steak used to mean something. A special occasion, a reward, a night out that felt earned. Beef prices just hit a 75-year low in cattle supply and record highs at the register, and it's splitting the steakhouse industry wide open. 5 chains are bleeding out. 5 chains are thriving anyway. Grab your fork. This one cuts both ways. Let's get into the 5 to avoid. 5. Claim Jumper. Claim Jumper opened its first location in Los Alamitos, California in 1977, built by founder Craig Nikoloff on portions so oversized they came with their own reputation. The concept worked for decades. Diners drove out of their way for a single entree that could genuinely feed 2 people. Nikoloff sold the majority of the company to a private equity firm in 2005, chasing faster national expansion. 5 years later, in 2010, the owners filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. Restaurant giant Landry's Inc. bought the chain out of that bankruptcy, taking over 45 locations spread across 8 states. The closures never really stopped after that. Claim Jumper shut its La Mesa and Temecula, California locations in 2024. It closed its Henderson, Nevada location in April of 2026. Conagra still licenses the Claim Jumper name for a separate line of frozen supermarket meals, meaning the brand technically lives on in grocery freezers even as the actual restaurants keep disappearing one metro area at a time. Restaurant operator Kelly Companies took over day-to-day management of most of the surviving Claim Jumper locations after Landry's acquisition, a sign of just how much the brand has been passed between operators over the past 2 decades. Every ownership change came with a promise of stability. None of them actually delivered it. Diners who remember the original Los Alamitos location describe a restaurant that felt like an event. Oversized booths, a mountain of food, a genuine sense of occasion built entirely around the size of the plate. That sense of occasion does not survive a private equity buyout, followed by a bankruptcy, followed by a second change of ownership. Somewhere in that chain of transactions, the actual experience got lost. A chain that once defined itself by portions so big they came with a warning is now defined by how many addresses it has quietly abandoned. Landry's has not announced any broader plan to stop the bleeding, and restaurant analysts point to rising beef costs as the single biggest reason large portion concepts like this one keep losing ground. You do not build a brand around oversized cuts of beef, and then get to act surprised when beef becomes the most expensive ingredient in the building. Up next, a name that once ran close to 700 restaurants nationwide and is now down to a number so small it barely registers. 4. Ponderosa and Bonanza. Ponderosa opened in Indiana in 1965, themed after the television western Bonanza, and eventually absorbed the rival Bonanza Steakhouse chain under one shared parent company. At its peak in the late 1980s and early 1990s, the combined chains ran close to 700 locations across the country, anchoring strip malls and highway exits from coast to coast. Then the slide began. Location count fell below 400 within a decade, as buffet-style dining fell out of favor with younger diners. Parent company Metro Media Steakhouses filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 2008 and re-emerged the following year under a new name, Homestyle Dining. Fat Brands, the same conglomerate now cycling through Smoky Bones and Twin Peaks, eventually acquired both the Ponderosa and Bonanza brands as part of a broader restaurant roll-up strategy. By 2024 and 2025, industry reports placed the combined surviving footprint somewhere between 20 and 30 locations nationwide, a fraction of 1% of where the brand once stood. A chain that once fed entire families off a buffet line for a few dollars, a plate is now down to a rounding error most Americans under 40 have never even heard of. You grew up seeing a Ponderosa sign off the highway exit on every road trip. That exit does not have one anymore, and there is a real chance the nearest surviving location is not within driving distance of your house at all. Buffet-style steakhouses depend on volume to make the math work, and volume is exactly what beef prices this high do not allow anymore. Ponderosa and Bonanza were never premium brands to begin with. They competed almost entirely on price, which made them the most exposed of any format the moment beef stopped being cheap. Other ultra-budget steak concepts from the same era have suffered the identical fate. One 1955 cafeteria-style chain that once ran 28 locations nationwide is now down to a single remaining restaurant. A business model built on cheap steak has nowhere to hide once steak stops being cheap. Coming up, a 2020 bankruptcy that still has not stopped bleeding locations 5 full years later. 3. Sizzler. Sizzler opened in Culver City, California in 1958, built around a self-serve salad bar paired with an affordable grilled steak, a formula that felt genuinely new at the time. At its peak, the chain ran roughly 270 locations across the country, a national footprint built almost entirely on that low price point. Sizzler USA filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in 2020, at the height of pandemic-era dining shutdowns, citing lease obligations it could no longer meet with dining rooms closed. The bankruptcy bought it time. It did not buy it a recovery. By 2025, only about 74 Sizzler locations remained standing nationwide, a drop of roughly 70% from the chain's historical peak. That decline has not visibly slowed since the bankruptcy filing closed out. Rising beef costs have hit the salad bar and steak model especially hard, since Sizzler built its entire value proposition on a rock-bottom price point that simply does not pencil out against today's beef market. A franchise consultant who studies casual dining turnarounds put it simply: value format steakhouses built before the current beef shortage are now running math that no longer works, no matter how loyal the regulars are. A bankruptcy filing is supposed to be the reset button that saves a brand. For Sizzler, 5 years later, it looks more like the opening chapter of a much longer goodbye. The chain has leaned harder into its buffet and salad bar identity in recent years, trying to make the case that volume and variety can still beat a rising per-pound steak price. Regulars who grew up celebrating birthdays at Sizzler now drive past locations that simply are not there anymore, closed with little more than a note taped to the door. A steakhouse chain that built decades of loyalty on being the affordable option no longer has an affordable option left to sell, and that is a much harder problem than any single bankruptcy filing can fix. Salad bars and self-serve formats also carry higher labor and food safety overhead than a typical sit-down menu, another cost pressure stacking on top of the beef problem at exactly the wrong time. If a steakhouse going from 270 locations down to 74 surprises you, hit subscribe now because the next entry is even more dramatic. 2. Outback Steakhouse. Outback Steakhouse once operated roughly 750 dining locations across the United States, one of the most recognizable steakhouse names in the entire country. Parent company Bloomin' Brands announced in October of 2025 that it would close more than 40 underperforming locations after a full portfolio review. Half of those closures came from lease expirations tied to restaurants dating back to the 1990s and early 2000s, the company said, while the rest simply were not pulling their weight financially anymore. 21 locations closed during 2025 alone. Bloomin' Brands has said another 22 are expected to close in 2026 as more leases run out on schedule. The chain's footprint has fallen to under 670 locations nationwide, and it is still sliding quarter over quarter. Bloomin' Brands calls its plan a comprehensive turnaround strategy, the same phrase nearly every struggling chain reaches for right before more closures get announced. A turnaround strategy that involves closing dozens of restaurants is not really a turnaround. It is a controlled retreat wearing better branding. Beef prices are not helping the math. Steak spiked 16% to $12.73 a pound in March of 2026, according to Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis data, squeezing a chain built around the Bloomin' Onion and an affordable steak dinner. Sister brand Fleming's Prime Steakhouse, also under the Bloomin' Brands umbrella, closed its Upper Kirby location in Houston on April 18th of 2026, after 25 years in business, after the company chose not to renew its lease. You remember Outback as the place with the endless bread basket and the Aussie-themed menu. The menu is still there. Fewer and fewer of the actual restaurants are. Bloomin' Brands also owns Carrabba's Italian Grill and Bonefish Grill, meaning the exact same cost pressure squeezing Outback is quietly squeezing 3 other national chains under the same roof. A single parent company managing this many simultaneous closures across this many brands is not weathering a rough quarter. It is restructuring in slow motion, one lease at a time. Just ahead, a high-end chain charging $77 for a single ribeye that still could not outrun its own bankruptcy filing. 1. 801 Chop House. 801 Chop House built a genuine following as a high-end steakhouse chain across the Midwest, known for dry-aged cuts, an extensive wine list, and a sister seafood concept called 801 Fish. Its parent company, 801 Restaurant Group, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection on April 10th of 2026 in the United States Bankruptcy Court for the District of Kansas. Court filings listed total debt of roughly $18,700,000, with combined assets and liabilities somewhere between $10 million and $50 million. The same menu that filed for bankruptcy protection lists a 16-ounce ribeye for $77, a price point most casual diners would associate with financial stability, not a courtroom filing. Leadership insists every single location remains open and operating normally throughout the restructuring process. 801 Restaurant Group. CFO Chris Harris told reporters the individual restaurant entities operate separately from the parent company and are not themselves part of the bankruptcy filing. You can charge $77 for a single steak and still end up in bankruptcy court if beef input costs climb faster than customers are willing to follow them upward. That is exactly what happened here, and it is the clearest sign yet that no price point, however premium, is fully insulated from a beef market this tight. A chain charging premium prices for premium beef still could not outprice a historic beef shortage that has pushed the national cattle herd to its lowest level since 1951. That is not a pricing problem specific to one chain. That is the entire industry hitting the exact same wall at the exact same time. 801 Restaurant Group is based in Kansas and had spent years building a reputation as one of the more ambitious, high-end steakhouse operators in the Midwest, expanding steadily before this filing. A restructuring plan can save a company on paper while doing nothing to change the underlying math driving the crisis in the first place. And that gap is exactly where 801 Chop House currently sits. 5 chains down. 5 chains prove the exact same. Beef crisis does not have to be a death sentence for everyone. Every single chain above is fighting the exact same rising cost of beef. Bankruptcy court, shrinking footprints, and a menu too expensive to save itself. That is the pattern connecting all 5 names, and none of it happened by accident. The 5 that are still worth your money. Not every steakhouse is struggling. A handful figured out how to grow through the exact same beef prices that are burying everyone else on this list. If a steakhouse chain growing traffic during a nationwide beef shortage sounds impossible, hit the like and share button, because these 5 chains did not get lucky. Each one made a specific, deliberate choice that the chains above never made. And that choice is exactly what kept the lights on. 5. Black Angus Steakhouse. Black Angus opened its first location in Los Altos, California in 1964, founded by Stuart Anderson on a Western theme and a promise of an affordable steak dinner with all the fixings. The chain grew fast through the decades, changing hands from Saga to Marriott to American Restaurant Group, reporting revenue as high as $150 million as recently as 2017. American Restaurant Group filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 2009, and ownership eventually landed with private equity firm Versa Capital Management. The chain is down to about 30 locations as of October of 2025, a fraction of its historical footprint. But the surviving footprint is stable, not collapsing. System-wide sales are projected to rise between 4.5% and 5.5%, with an average check of about $42 per person. EBITDA margins have held between 12% and 14% even through rising protein costs, thanks largely to renegotiated supply chain contracts locked in ahead of the current price spike. The company launched Black Angus Market in 2024, a retail arm that sells its beef directly to shoppers, and rolled out a new Bullseye Bar concept in 2025 aimed at younger, late-night diners. Instead of chasing more dining rooms during a beef shortage, Black Angus started selling the same steak through more channels at once: dine-in, takeout, and retail. A chain that filed for bankruptcy once under a previous owner has quietly become proof that a smaller, more disciplined footprint can outlast a bigger one that never adjusted. Early Black Angus advertisements famously promised a steak dinner with all the fixings for $1.99. Today's average check of $42 looks jarring next to that number, but it is honest math for what beef actually costs now. Shrinking on purpose, instead of shrinking by accident, turned out to be the difference between a controlled decline and a death spiral. Next up, a Brazilian steakhouse betting on double-digit growth while nearly everyone else on this list is closing locations instead. 4. Fogo de Chão. Fogo de Chão brought the Brazilian churrascaria concept to the United States, built around tableside carved meats, an open churrasco grill, and a seasonal market table of salads and cured meats. The chain posted its third consecutive year of 15% growth as of 2023, a streak most casual dining brands would kill for during a period this volatile. It opened 22 new locations that same year alone, working steadily toward its 100th restaurant overall. New openings continued through 2024 and 2025, with announced locations in Nashville, San Antonio, Oklahoma City, and Washington, D.C. The company confirmed a fresh 2026 expansion plan spanning both new domestic locations and continued international growth, alongside remodeled restaurants featuring an enhanced open grill design. Guests get a full view of Gaucho Chef's hand-carving proteins tableside, an experience-driven format that scales surprisingly well even as beef costs climb behind the scenes. An all-you-can-eat carved meat format sounds like the single worst possible business model to run during a national beef shortage. Fogo de Chão has made it work anyway, by leaning harder into the theater and the experience instead of trying to compete purely on price the way smaller chains have to. The company has also expanded its bar program with an elevated cocktail menu and outdoor dining options, giving guests more reasons to spend beyond the protein itself. International growth is part of the same playbook, with the company actively pushing into new countries at the same time it keeps adding United States locations. Coming up, the Darden-owned chain whose three-course prix-fixe menu just pulled off a full pandemic comeback. 3. Ruth's Chris Steakhouse. Ruth's Chris traces back to a single Chris Steakhouse in New Orleans in 1927, bought and renamed by Ruth Vertel in 1965 after she mortgaged her own home to buy it. 23 locations shut down during the pandemic, forcing mass layoffs and executives giving up their own salaries just to keep the rest of the brand alive. In 2023, Darden Restaurants acquired the chain for $715 million, making Ruth's Chris Darden's fourth largest brand at 155 locations worldwide. The cash injection worked. Same-store sales at Ruth's Chris grew again in fiscal 2026, part of a broader turnaround across all of Darden's fine dining brands. Darden executives specifically credited a three-course prix-fixe menu for pulling in guests who might otherwise skip a steakhouse at this price point altogether. Fine dining comps across Darden's portfolio, including Ruth's Chris, the Capitol Grill, and Eddie V's, rose 2.1%, the first meaningful growth that category had posted in years. A brand that was laying off staff and burning cash reserves during the pandemic is now Darden's proof that fine dining can still grow, given the right owner and the right menu strategy at the right moment. 74 of Ruth's Chris's 155 locations are franchised, an unusually high share for a Darden brand and a structure that let the company keep expanding without shouldering every single opening cost itself. Darden's fine dining category, which also includes the Capitol Grill and Eddie V's, more than doubled in size the moment Ruth's Chris joined the portfolio. Just ahead, the Darden-owned steakhouse chain quietly outpacing casual dining as a whole, one new restaurant at a time. 2. Longhorn Steakhouse. Longhorn Steakhouse has grown into one of Darden's biggest brands, running 608 locations nationwide and adding a net 22 new restaurants over the past year alone. Florida alone carried 71 Longhorn locations as of June of 2024, a sign of just how deep the chain's roots run in its home region. While overall full-service restaurant foot traffic declined slightly in 2024, Longhorn's visits actually increased 4.3%, according to Placer.ai foot traffic data. The chain has added more than 100 locations over the past decade, even as older, more established rivals were quietly shrinking around it. Darden credits corporate procurement. For a lot of that resilience, the company negotiates beef prices in advance at a scale most independent steakhouses simply cannot match on their own. Longhorn has also absorbed some of its own rising costs rather than passing every single dollar straight through to the customer at the register. A Stephens equity research analyst who covers the sector said steak still reads to most consumers as an elevated premium experience, which is exactly why Longhorn can protect its margins without losing traffic. Darden now owns 3 of the 5 largest steakhouse chains in the country by Technomics count: Longhorn, Ruth's Chris, and the Capitol Grill, making it the single biggest player in American steak, whether customers realize it or not. A restaurant analyst who studies casual dining staffing said the general manager at the store level is often the single most important factor in a chain's success, more important than the menu itself, and Longhorn has invested heavily in exactly that role. 1. Texas Roadhouse. Texas Roadhouse struggled through the pandemic like almost every full-service chain in the country, closing dining rooms and bleeding cash right alongside its competitors. It came back so completely that by 2025, it had dethroned Olive Garden as America's top casual dining chain by total sales. The chain just logged its 60th consecutive quarter of same-store sales growth, excluding the pandemic shutdown, a streak that stretches all the way back to 2010. Same-store sales jumped 7.1% in the first quarter of 2026 alone, with traffic climbing 4.5% on top of that. Total revenue for the trailing year came in near $5.9 billion, and the company still carries 0 long-term debt on its balance sheet. Every location employs its own in-house butchers, internally nicknamed Meat Heroes, who hand-cut steaks on site instead of relying on a centralized commissary the way most competitors do. The company opened 30 new locations in 2025 and plans 35 more across 2026, expanding even as rivals like Outback are actively pulling back. Beef costs are hitting Texas Roadhouse too. Commodity inflation ran 9.5% last quarter alone, cutting restaurant-level margins by a full 3 percentage points. CEO Jerry Morgan told investors the game is never won in the first quarter, but a start this strong never hurts either. The company's answer to rising beef costs was not to shrink. It raised menu prices by less than 2% and kept opening restaurants anyway, betting that traffic growth alone would cover the gap. So far, that bet is paying off, with a market capitalization above $12 billion and a 50-state, 10-country footprint still expanding by the month. The company has also poured money into technology most competitors are still testing: tablet payment at the table, digital kitchen display systems that replace paper tickets, and a new waitlist management system that keeps walk-in wait times down. Roadhouse also owns 2 growing spin-off concepts: Bubba's 33 Sports Bar and Jagger's Fast Casual, both expanding alongside the flagship brand rather than competing with it for the same customer. A steakhouse that is investing in new technology, new spin-off brands, and new store openings all at the same time during a historic beef shortage is not playing defense. It is the one chain on this entire list still playing to win. 5 chains got buried by the exact same beef market: bankruptcy filings, shrinking footprints, and a high-end chain that could not outprice its own menu. Claim Jumper lost its identity one closure at a time. Ponderosa and Bonanza went from 700 locations to a rounding error. Sizzler's bankruptcy never actually stopped the bleeding. Outback is closing dozens of restaurants under a parent company managing the same crisis across 3 other national brands at once. 801 Chop House proves even a $77 ribeye is not immune. 5 chains prove the same beef crisis is survivable through retail spin-offs, tableside theater, Prix Fix menus, disciplined expansion, and in-house butchers who actually control the cut before it ever reaches the grill. Black Angus shrank on purpose and got stronger for it. Fogo de Chão is still opening restaurants at double-digit growth rates. Ruth's Chris turned a pandemic near collapse into Darden's newest growth story. Longhorn is quietly outgrowing casual dining as a whole, and Texas Roadhouse dethroned Olive Garden while every other chain on this list was busy closing dining rooms. The steakhouses that are struggling are not struggling because steak stopped selling. They are struggling because they stopped giving customers a real reason to choose them over the beef aisle at the grocery store. The ones still winning gave customers exactly that reason: whether it was a hand-cut steak, a tableside show, or a menu that actually adjusted to what beef costs today instead of what it cost a decade ago. None of the 5 winners on this list got there by accident, and none of the 5 losers collapsed by accident either. Every single outcome traces back to a specific decision somebody made about price, portion size, or ownership structure long before beef prices ever became the excuse. Check which one you are driving to this weekend, and ask yourself honestly which list it actually belongs on. Thanks for watching. Click on the next video where I ranked the 10 worst grocery store meat departments still selling expired products with a fresh label, because the same beef crisis wrecking these steakhouses is hitting your local supermarket even harder.